Hello, everybody, and welcome to the HTML All the Things podcast, episode number 37, When to Start. I'm your host, Matt Lawrence, and I'm joined again by my co-host, Mike Coran. What have you been up to this week, Mike?
Hey, Matt. So this week's been a big week for us. We finally hit 1,000 Instagram followers. I mean, I say finally, but it's been it's been pretty quick, less than a year. So thank you to everyone that has followed us on there. Thank you to everyone that has been listening to the podcast. It is also doing great. And really, we're just excited to keep making episodes. We're happy that everyone's listening. And again, to kind of help us out, the best way to help us out really is to tell all your friends about us that you think would benefit from a podcast like this. Give us a review and a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or any of the platforms that you're listening to this on. Those are the things that really help us the most. And if you want to help us even more, you can check us out on Patreon. I think it's patreon.com/HTML all the things.
That's correct.
And we'll have some new and exciting information on that front as well. With that, we have started getting stickers, HTML all things stickers. So I got my first batch this week just to do a test run. Looking pretty good. We have some variations in mind for the future. So we'll keep you posted, definitely on Instagram, maybe on Twitter. So, follow us on all those things. Get ready for some crazy branded HTML all things content, because we have some ideas, that's for sure. What about you, Matt?
So same kind of thing. So been obviously super excited that everyone's following us on there. So another thank you to everyone who's following us on Instagram and all the other channels. And so we've been kind of working on more, verbally and just kind of discussing. But we've been more, kind of discussing some of the branding stuff that we need to sort of get more stickers and get better stickers and that type of thing. So that's been a big conversation, and I'm sure will be a big conversation for probably at least a month or so until we kind of get things sorted. We've also had some conversations on, and none of this is set in stone, but Mike kind of mentioned it briefly there, is we're trying to get some more stuff onto the Patreon. So we want it to be more of a place where you could maybe get something, hopefully, maybe some stickers or maybe something else. We're not 100% sure. Right now, it's just sort of like you could go there and you can pay for, I think there's like the $1 tier, and then there's like another tier for like if you want to be on the podcast, like getting, promoted in there with your link and your name. And there's a couple others. You can go and check the actual Patreon page. But it's just kind of like very entry level stuff, obviously. So we were kind of looking at maybe getting more of a, I keep wanting to say the word like a club, but it's not a club. It's just sort of something that we want our viewers to actually have, and like is a bit more of a connection to us, as well as we do want to kind of get going on our community. So Mike and I have had this discussion 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, like I said, I was doing a bunch of family stuff, and I still am, but we're working on that Discord. So the Discord would have been long done. Should I have? I don't know how to say that, but anyway, should I have not had to leave? Hopefully that's said correctly. Anyway, Jesus. But anyway, yeah. So if I didn't have to leave, then the Discord would have been all set up and everything, because I got all the channels and stuff all done. So I'm gonna start working on that hopefully this week. I'm still playing catch up this week. I still got some family stuff to deal with this week as well, but I am very rapidly getting back into it. Today was a full day of work, etc. So hopefully we get the Discord up, and then because we really want to start kind of building up a community of kind of like-minded developers and people who are just maybe just even interested in the industry, just want to chat about the industry, just want to chat about tech, whatever. And we'll be kind of posting that type of stuff, and there will hopefully be a Discord reward on there as well, maybe like a unique Patreon channel or whatever they call it on Discord, just sort of like how you see on other like Patreon people. I don't know what the term is for Patreon. I never know what it is. It's like the people who pay are the patrons. And then do you call the people Patreons, or do you call them creators? I think maybe you just call them creators.
Probably creators, yeah.
Creators. So yeah, so just like you maybe see on other creators Discords, that's sort of what we're probably going to be doing too, just sort of a run-of-the-mill, just kind of sticking with the sort of industry standard, if you will, in that regard. But right now, you're here for the podcast, and let's discuss that. So this episode, kind of in light of the episode where we talked about PWAs, it kind of touches on a little bit of back in the day we did a how to get started episode, and then more recently we also did an episode about advanced topics. So it's kind of touching on all of those things, because when to start is a great question when dealing with advanced topics. We have a PWA story about that because we more recently did that. And then, of course, this goes hand in hand with that other Getting Started episode that we did way back in the day, whatever it was called. So in this episode, we're going to be discussing, and I'll go through the segments here with a brief summary. So segment number 1 is just appropriately named When to Start. I'm going to be kind of describing what we mean by, get started, getting started, why are you getting started, why are people getting hooked up on stuff, that type of stuff. That's going to be in segment number 1. And then there's different processes that people take when it comes to getting started on something. And so Mike and I did our own segment. So I have segment number 2 here, which is Matt's process. And that's literally just going to be my process of how to get started. I kind of do like a real brief summary of it. Mike's is a little bit more structured just because I'm going to be introducing that first segment to you. So segment number 3, as I already mentioned, is Mike's process. And that's much more structured with proper steps and that type of thing, and a more detailed look at exactly what he does to get started on some things. And then this web news, and we've covered this partially and fully in different contexts, is Apple. So web news this week is named is entitled Apple, and I haven't read the web news at all. I know Mike was kind of excited to introduce it and that type of thing, so I have the show notes here, but I have not read them. Mike's going to be introducing and talking about that.
Get ready.
And telling
Get
some
ready.
pretty hilarious stories. I do know the one technical story that he experienced. So let's get this started. So segment number 1, when to start. So one of the things you'll hear as an entrepreneur, and we've mentioned this on the show several times, is to quote unquote just start. And this means that instead of being bogged down by, some what ifs or like, can I do this, etc., you should just jump in and get started on whatever it is you're working on. So a prime example would be that a would-be entrepreneur gets stuck reading into the basics of how to start a business, what pitfalls could happen, what issues may occur, etc., etc. They get all wrapped up in all those issues. And while it is a good thing for sure to be prepared, you could read for years upon years and still have things to flip through, different guides, different, editorials, and more stuff's coming out all the time about business. So it's generally better to understand the basics, in our opinion, and then do your best to cover all the bases that you desperately need to, and then just kind of start. And this kind of avoids that paranoia of reading all the laws and all the issues that everyone has fallen into in the past. And of course, like I want to reiterate here, definitely read and understand these things, but there is a point where you've read enough and it's time to take action. There's no way you can cover every base all the time. And if you try to do that, you'll never get started because the industries are changing, laws are changing, everything. Just make sure, that you're in between the lines, you're not breaking any major laws, that type of thing, and just kind of go with it. And every place's like laws and regulations and whatever else they would call it, any sort of business enforcement, I suppose it is all different. So make sure you do absolutely familiarize yourself with that, and maybe consult a professional if you're unsure about that type of stuff as well. Now, to reiterate that, keep in mind that being cautious is not a bad thing either. If you think that, you're about to make a new app and you're questioning like, oh, maybe it breaks, maybe it's a little bit out of the realm of these 2 regulations in my country, or maybe it, it's kind of like in the gray area of the law or something like that. Maybe it's something to do with copyrights or, something. Maybe you're using images that you're unsure if you're allowed to. Whatever the heck it is, there's tons and tons of situations you can get yourself in. If you think that you might be bumping up against any of those walls, do kind of hesitate for those things. Definitely, check out what you're doing. Make sure that you're operating within the law in your country or your region or whatever it is. Make sure that you're doing things legally. And the one thing I do want to say, though, is with these legal concerns, don't get bogged down for years without acting, so otherwise your competition is just going to fly by you. Sometimes you will get bogged down on something and, it's mandatory at that point. But if you're just like really worried about like, oh, I don't know about this, maybe, maybe you should just go ahead sometimes. It's one of those things. And the best way that we know to check if you're allowed to go ahead with stuff like this, and we do this with all kinds of stuff with our accounting because we are totally unaware of how to do taxes and that type of thing, is we just go to a professional. So in this case, you would go to a lawyer, and some of them are, in Canada, some of them are free for a consultation, some aren't, some whatever. So you do have to check into that. But if you're unsure and you want to make sure you're legal, which you should make sure that what you're doing is legal, you definitely should just talk to a lawyer, get them to explain, the law, which is a complex thing, to you in an everyday term, so that you have the peace of mind so you can just kind of go forward. So whether that costs you a few dollars or whether it was a free consultation, whatever, if it prevents you from potentially getting fined or something like that. So just make sure you know what you're doing, but don't get bogged down in it. Don't sit there and try to learn like law. There's people there, specifically lawyers in this case, which can help you. So definitely talk to them if you need help with this type of stuff. So now that kind of stuff's out of the way, let's say you started your business, you whatever, there are other ways you can get bogged down in getting started as well. So specifically, if you're ready to get programming on your new app, so maybe it's a new app, a new website, whatever program you're working on maybe a Windows application, whatever it is, you're bound to hit another wall, and that is the learning curve. So beyond all that legal stuff, unless you're experienced in everything your project needs, you'll end up hitting a lot of walls. Maybe you don't even know where to start. And this is another major point of contention that people get stuck in. Let's say that you want to make a PWA, so a progressive web app, and you're not experienced at all with service workers, a situation that we recently found ourselves in. And you could read example after example, look at tons of different solutions, different plugins, even try different programming languages. And by the end of the day, you're just reading up on what you want to be doing. You're not doing what you want to be doing. So obviously guides, tutorials, and research do go a long way, and they are very, very valuable, but it's easy to get stuck reading through a plethora of different ways that you can implement a solution for your given app or your whatever project it is. And furthermore, if it's a passion project, you want to make sure that you're using the very best solution that you can. So generally you can get bogged down in there where you just keep looking through different solutions, different options over and over and over again, and never actually start making that service worker. So, and that's in our example, of course, because we recently were working on service workers. So make sure you just don't get bogged down. This is another major area where you just need to, quote unquote, just start. Learn a little bit and just get going. So the time differs. So like some people might ask right now, like, well, how do I know when to stop reading? Like you said, guides are useful. Like, do I read one guide and just go? Do I read 10 guides and just go? Whatever it is. The time in this particular case does differ from person to person and from project to project for that matter. But at the end of the day, you need or want to make that deliverable, that project, that app, whatever it is, and we're all just human. So it's not going to be perfect. Even if you're a beginner. So if it's a passion project and you're sitting there striving for perfection, make it good, make it so that you're happy with it, but nothing's ever going to be perfect. And at this point, what I would kind of suggest as like a blanket term is to read up enough so you can navigate Google searches on whatever it is you're researching and then just start making it. So with service workers, we read enough that I was able to say like, oh, I'm having trouble with the promise of this, or I'm having trouble with like this isn't booting up, or I'm having trouble with, Vue.js isn't doing this, etc., etc. I was able to have enough knowledge of the terms and the understanding where I could read solutions and search for solutions, and then I was learning that way. So, so basically, if you end up pivoting, so if you let's say you read 10, 15 guides, or you read 2 guides, it doesn't matter. Like I said, difference from person to person. And you want to just dive in, and you do dive in, and you end up having to pivot a few times. Who cares? As long as you keep moving towards that goal, that deliverable, finishing up with that thing. And the one thing that people really need to keep in mind as well is that you'll end up learning way more working on the solution rather than just reading about it. So just kind of like how you might have let's say you have a school program that has a certain amount of class time and then a certain amount of co-op time. A lot of the time people will say, well, I was at co-op time a quarter of the amount of hours I was in class, but I learned so much during that co-op, like it's so much more in a quarter of the time. It's kind of the same thing here, right? It's instead of you constantly reading and not really retaining too much about service workers, in our case, like I said, in our example, just constantly like reading different ways to implement service workers, it definitely benefits you to like read enough, start working on it, hit a wall, research that, and you'll remember it because you're interacting with it, you're working with it, you're doing it, and that'll really help with that type of stuff. And as I said, the quote-unquote just start point is different for each person, and it's also different, like I said, again, for each project. So in the next two segments, Mike and I'll be going through our particular procedures on how exactly we kind of navigate this sort of landscape. And even though you've heard me talk for a while now, I'm going to go on to my segment number 2, Matt's process, unless Mike has any comments about that first one.
Just want to reiterate the whole legal issues and stuff like that. I know it doesn't seem probably that web developers would have to worry about it too much. There are certain situations where you would. I think what we got tied up on and why we kind of bring it up is if you're in kind of a in between web developer and IT segment. So like stuff like loss of data, stuff like that is a little bit intimidating. So when you get a little bit more clarity from someone that knows this business from a legal standpoint, it makes you feel a little less anxious about starting something like that. Again, and this is in reference to like losing someone's data. What's the legal repercussions of that? I think for us as well was if we were doing IT and going into someone's homes, in someone's home, what's the repercussions of us breaking something in someone's home and stuff. So those are the kinds of questions we asked, and once we got our answers, we were kind of satisfied and continued on. But for the most part, if you're just doing a simple website or design, don't get like Matt said, don't get bogged down in a legal questions. Don't think that every single web developer needs to go through this process of talking to a lawyer. But again, if you have those issues, it's better to go to a lawyer than to sit down in the Library of Congress and read 150 books on the legality of everything that you're doing, because you're just wasting time and you're kind of delaying yourself from moving on to the more important stuff in your life. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that. I thought Matt brought up a good point there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is one thing. I mean, I'm going to mention it here too as well, but that's one thing that we really struggled with when we started our business, when we were originally going to be doing an IT business, and then we went to more web development. We definitely thought it was more of a legal procedure just because we didn't know the procedure at all. So we just kind of assumed, oh, it must be this big legal proceeding to get registered as a business and this, that, and the other thing. And we found out, yeah, there's some stuff you have to do. Of course, you're registering a business, but at least in Canada anyway, when we did it, it really wasn't that bad. It was like an online application, and for the most part, we were open for business. I didn't even have accounting software. We just kind of kept everything in an Excel. And of course, your mileage may vary. Your country obviously has different laws, different procedures, and that type of thing, which you definitely need to read up on. But in general, and I do mean in general, countries do want businesses to open up. And and especially in Canada's case, they're willing to make that procedure easy because they know that when businesses start making money, they obviously make, tax money, to be blunt. So, again, it depends on your country. Obviously, check those regulations and laws in your country. But in general, once you figure out what the procedure is, at least in our case, the procedure really wasn't as bad as we thought at all, and we ended up getting started. So I'll kind of use that as a transition to kind of jump right into this second segment here, and I'll just kind of reiterate some of this. So when we first started our business, we had a hard time trying to figure out exactly what we needed to do, and we weren't sure whether we needed whether you needed a lawyer or if you needed to declare your business somewhere, and nothing in our schooling really covered this type of thing. I took a business course in high school, and they covered things like different types of businesses, like partnerships, corporations, etc. Those are the kind of like the legal names, but we just didn't really know how to kick it off. Like, what form do I sign? Do I even sign a form? Like, what do we do? So we ended up calling a few places, and a lot of them really didn't get back to us. And then we ended up having a meeting with a lawyer, which gave us some information on opening what we were planning at the time was an IT business. And that kind of like that goal kind of changed eventually. Like, we got a bunch of that information, and we were like, oh, okay, that's great, whatever. We kind of mulled over it, and then an opportunity opened up. We've covered this in depth in a previous episode, but we decided from that opportunity that we wanted to go into web development, and that was like a big pivot of us. So when we did that, or big pivot for us rather, and so when we did that, we ended up finding just a business advisor, and they took us through the procedure. They told us, this is how you do it. This is what happens. If you want to do it this way, this is how much this costs if you do it this way. Just real basic stuff that we needed so that we could start the procedure. We weren't paying them to start the procedure. It was a free consultation, and they helped us out with that. And full disclosure, we're still with them today. They do all of our accounting, stuff like that, and we obviously pay them for that. But those free consultations in the beginning were monumentally helpful because they got us to be, we got to go to this website, register here, we got to go here, make sure we keep these records, etc., etc., etc. And they've helped us grow as well with, getting different accounting software eventually as we became more popular and that type of stuff. So, find a good business advisor is really my suggestion there. But anyway, we've mentioned this origin story in the past episode, and basically what I'm trying to get at in relation to this episode is that we got bogged down clearly in the beginning, but we kept pushing through and eventually just got started. So, and it was later than we wanted. Like, I think we wanted to register like 2 or 3 months before we ended up actually doing it, but we still eventually got the job done. And getting bogged down, especially if you're doing something that's low effort, like if it's going to be your side hustle or something like that, and you really don't want to spend much time on it, of course you're going to be having problems with because you're going to get bogged down, and you're just not going to read the papers. You're not going to be pushing as hard as it is. So sometimes, like we said, just get started, just get going, and that's that push that we needed. So in terms of a web development project, so if you take it out of the business side, in terms of a web development project, one of the more recent examples that we've mentioned, and I've mentioned this over and over again, is that we learned about service workers recently, which resulted in us getting bogged down, or me in particular, we got bogged down in my research. And the procedure for this was basically I Googled service workers and I read up on the very basics. So, learn how they work, learn how to implement them at a very high level, so I know what tools I'll need at my disposal. Unfortunately, since service workers are complex, I was completely new to them. I had to read up on some related topics, so things like JavaScript workers, promises, those type of things, and that gave me like a bit of useful background information. And then I had to figure out how to get service workers to work with Vue.js. And I don't want to get into this like too much because we did cover this a lot, but what this is this story really touches on what this episode is trying to talk about, and that is dealing with advanced topics or complex topics are particularly easy to get bogged down into because there are a lot of variables that you as a beginner will not be aware of and will be tempted to read up on, leading to the loop of constant research. So when we were learning CSS, or when I was learning CSS, I did get bogged down, of course, a little bit, but for the most part, it's like, if you're using Flexbox, this is the solution. If you're using block, display block, this is the solution. If if you're having trouble doing transitions, this is the solution. And there's a few different solutions, but for the most part, the results are just straight up visual, and you can see that. And you don't really get bogged down here, but with these more advanced topics, it's really easy to get bogged down. So what I basically started doing to get myself out of this is I started, instead of doing more general research, I started narrowing that research from those initial general searches down to my particular situation, which was using service workers with Vue.js. And that more specific research led me to a few examples that I was able to implement into my testing, which eventually led us to the solution that we're working on now. So just slowly, kind of chipping away at the research, chipping away, and then eventually it's like, aha, I like this example, more or less, let's copy paste this. Oh, it does work. Okay, now let's modify the whole example. Let's redo the example so that it works in my scenario. And, let's use a couple of guides that complement it, and let's put it all together. And obviously there's errors there. And that's kind of how we got our partially working model where it is right now. So that's one way to get out of it is, you're not confident enough to completely quit researching. Well, then don't, but start narrowing that research, because eventually you're going to be doing a lot of overlap. And that leads me to my next point, which is one of the telltale signs that I've read too much is that my bookmarks, or the resources that I have set aside, they have a lot of overlapping information. And obviously there's going to be some overlap. You're talking about the same subjects. But if I ever find myself bookmarking a variety of resources that essentially, quote unquote, read in circles, or if they're covering the exact same topics but in a slightly different way, then I'll generally at that point be like, okay, I've read, like I'm literally, like quite literally reading in a circle, and I'm generally going to stop researching, and I'm going to start implementing with some of those examples that I've inevitably bookmarked. And that's kind of my procedure with this type of stuff. Like I said, for the most part with UI stuff, I kind of have a more direct solution, but when I'm dealing with these more advanced topics, this is how I do it, and it really helps me kind of get off of the reading train, because I remember I was reading about promises, because I don't really do much JS, and so I was reading about promises, and then when I was reading about that, they were like, oh, you can learn more about promises in this, like, go to this guide, and it's like a 200-page guide or whatever, and there's you could read about promises for days from what I could tell, and it's like, well, that's just one part. That's not even service workers. That's just a part of this thing. This is like a big. This is now becoming a big topic. So yeah, so kind of like get off of the research, narrow it down, and soon enough you'll be like, oh, I don't want to read anymore, I just want to do it. And that's kind of what you want to force yourself to do. So I'm going to kind of pass it off to Mike now, unless he has any other comment to talk about his particular process.
Yeah, I think I'll just move on to my process, because it'll kind of overlap anyway. But for my process, it's going to be more talking about the technical aspect, less business side. So I think you covered the business side really well, Matt. And you deal with most of those decisions at this point anyway. So you're more of a authority on that figure. So listen to Matt, everyone, on the business side. But I'll go into kind of it's a 4-step process, but it can obviously be extrapolated into a little bit more of a complex situation. But I'll give you the most basic rundown of how I approach starting as quickly as I possibly can into a new technology or a new library or a new framework. So the first thing I do is a feasibility assessment. So if I have a task assigned to me, I find something that I see could perform that task, and I'm not going to go into how I find something new and stuff because we've had episodes on that before as well. But essentially, I found something that I think will do what I want it to do. I do a feasibility assessment. So can the chosen technology, plugin, library, framework, etc., accomplish the set current and future goals of the application? So again, that key word there is future goals as well. So make sure that if you're talking to your client, you let them know, you ask them specifically, what do you want this application to do in the future? And not just now, like I know you want the bare minimum maybe now, or you want like a MVP, most viable product right now, but down the line, would you be interested in implementing like features A, B, C, like a more complex, camera features, more complex database features, stuff like that. So make sure that when you have that conversation right off the bat, you're choosing a technology that will fit the customer's needs for not only current time, future time as well. So that's kind of the feasibility assessment. The next thing I do is called a learning curve. So what I do here is I look at the technology, and based on my current knowledge, how long will it take me to spin something up and to understand, A, to get started with it, B, to accomplish my desired current functionality with it that I've outlined before in a requirements gathering method, and B, to optimize for the performance and then be able to add extensibility to my project. So being able to add features down the line that maybe are not part of the current scope of things. So again, when you're assessing the learning curve, you want to make sure that you kind of have a grasp on the technology to begin with, if time is of the essence, especially, and if you want to get started as fast as possible. And that's kind of the situation that I'm talking about. In my example, so I'm going to talk through an example that I do. So that we recently had to do. It was PWAs. So for a company, we had to create a kind of like a selling application for a company, and our goal was to be on any platform that company wants to be on and only maintain one code base. So PWA seemed like a very good option. And we went down a feasibility assessment. So that was step 1 with it, and found out that we could do it in a PWA. And then step 2 with the learning curve, well, a PWA is a standard HTML, CSS, JS, and then a small jump in complexity like Matt was talking about with service workers. So it's definitely learnable, and it's a quick start for sure because of that familiarity with the known languages. If it was something like Flutter, which is a completely separate language, Dart language, or something like even native Vue.js, or what is it, native script, or Vue native. I'm familiar with Vue, but Vue native and native script use a different templating, different Vue language. It's more XML based. It's more in line with what the mobile devices are using. So that would be a higher learning curve, and it would take me a lot longer to start and to be able to do the needed tasks that I would need to do. So you kind of weigh those options. Like if you really want to do a more complex thing, if you have the time and your customer has the money to kind of pay for it and the time to wait, then maybe it's better to do that. But if you're in a time constraint or in a budget constraint, then you got to do the thing that you're most familiar with that can accomplish that task. So anyway, in this case, that would be the PWA. So step 3 would be just get started. And I know this is kind of soon because really we haven't done too much research on the topic. Like I haven't done a lot of, bookmarking, important functionality features. Really, I've only figured out that this, yes, can accomplish what I need to do, not how it can. But what I do at step 3 is I literally start a project in my code editor, which in my case is VS Code, and I will start writing code right away. So I'll get something like a Hello World application up. In a PWA context, I'll just convert a product site into a PWA and see how it looks on a mobile device. I'll get started. I'll get the basics of the application as basic as I can get it, and I'll understand the starting aspects of that technology. If it's a library, I'll do something simple in the library, like just instantiating it and compiling it, something like that. But essentially what that gives you is a good base knowledge, and a good start where to ask the questions that need to be asked in the future. Because the next step is more research. So once you have that base, that knowledge of how to get started with the technology, you're going to have more insight into the Google searches that you're going to need to do to figure out your the different methods and stuff like that, and being able to apply it to your project. So again, now that you have a basic understanding, you can dive deeper into learning. And to do that, you can watch videos, read tutorials, whatever learning style works for you. Everyone's different. I'm more of a video person. And what I always do is while I'm watching that video or reading that tutorial, I'll code along with them. I'll make sure, in that project that I've just created, I'll kind of implement some of the features that they're implementing as well, just so I get a more grasp on the nuances of the application. Because watching and reading something is one thing, but you'll never understand and grasp these small little things that maybe you like to do in your code that the person that's giving you the tutorial doesn't do. And when you understand the limitations early on, you can overcome those limitations, or worst case scenario, you go down this path, and since you're getting started so quickly and you're not bogging so much time into it, you can pivot to a different technology if you find, that this one just cannot fit into your style of coding or into the functionality that you saw at the start that it could. Those are the kinds of advantages that a rapid getting started cycle give you. And I've experienced many times where I have had to pivot. And thankfully, because I started so rapidly, I didn't have to waste too much time or money. So that's kind of those are the kinds of quick things that I like to do. So when you're doing the more research, always do it with a goal. So for instance, trying to implement a feature on your roadmap right away. So even though it seems kind of early to plan out a feature when you're just learning a technology, it's good to kind of take one of those and be like, okay, I want to plan out offline mode of a PWA. I want to see how the communication of the service worker will work with my actual application to be able to pass information back and forth if the application goes offline. So how will I, redo my API calls in a service worker, stuff like that. So be cautious that your time is money. And if you invest that time right away into a useful feature, you can then take that and put it when you actually start working on the whole feature set. And when you start planning out your project, you'll have a better idea of how long it'll take, and you'll have a little bit of a break because one of the features is already built out. So that's kind of those are the kinds of my sections of advice for starting out really quickly, for when to start. Like, my when to start is start right away, pretty much. Just do the bare minimum amounts of work to make sure that you're not wasting your time. But then when you get to that point, go. So again, it's feasibility assessment, judge the learning curve, then get started. And then once you're started, do some more research right after getting started. That's kind of like the cycle that I go through. And I think that's really it. That covers our when to start segments. I'll ask Matt, do you have any comments on that, or should I move on to the web news where I'm going to burn Apple to the ground?
I'm really excited for this web news, if I'm blatantly honest.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna move on to the web news. So this web news is just blatantly labeled Apple. I just didn't want to do anything bad. Didn't want to label them badly, but essentially I've been having some issues with Apple, and that's what's going to be discussed now. So as I think everyone that's been listening to the podcast for more than a few episodes knows, our main operating system is Windows. Unfortunately, maybe a year or so ago, I had to buy a MacBook because I needed to compile iOS apps using Cordova and then debug them on in Safari on an iPad. So there's no way to do that without a Mac. You need Mac OS to be able to do that. Now, obviously, you can do other things to get Mac OS, but essentially, I was like, okay, I'm gonna buy a cheap MacBook, and then I'll be able to compile, this one-off application that we're working on, and then we'll also be able to use that MacBook for testing, etc. in the future. So it seemed like a smart investment at the time. It really didn't cost too much. I think it was like 500 Canadian dollars, which isn't very much for you US folk. It's probably like around $350, $400 US. It was a 2011 13-inch MacBook Pro. A little bit slow, did the job. I upgraded the hard drive to an SSD, which definitely accelerated things. But the problem that I was starting to have recently is I thought it was going to be more of a one-off project. So I wasn't thinking that I would actually have to use it as a machine when I'm traveling or something like that. So I would just, bring my Windows laptop with me wherever I would go. But what happened is the project kept evolving into more and more projects with iOS. So now I'm working a lot with iOS and iPads, and I'm working less and less with just, HTML5 web development. I'm working more native than HTML5. So that shifted me to the focus. So I had to bring that 13-inch laptop everywhere with me. So if I was, going to a coffee shop, I would usually have to go with a 13-inch laptop. If I was going on vacation, you have to go with that old MacBook, and it kind of hindered me because it's slow. It's an older processor. It's a dual core i5 from 2010 or something like that. It's a 3000 series i5. Not very fast. It only had 4 gigs of RAM. I could have upgraded that, but I just didn't want to spend any more money on it. And really the big thing for me was actually the screen real estate. So I have 3 screens right now. Going down to 1 screen at 13 inches was kind of really difficult for me. It really hindered my workflow. So the next step, actually the last big major problem that I had with that 2011 book was that it wasn't getting updated to the latest Mac OS Mojave. Now, it had a long update cycle. I'm not complaining about that. I think that's fine. But essentially what that meant was I couldn't install the new Xcode on it. It wasn't getting any more Xcode updates. And almost right away, and this was my assumption, I haven't actually told you this, Matt, but since my iPad updated and all our clients' iPads are updated, I couldn't compile my application to that iPad with that old Xcode. So I just tried recently, like a couple days ago, and that's it. So I remember I told you, I was like, I'm worried that Xcode won't update. I won't be able to keep updating my applications and keep working with the iPad that I have. Well, that turned out to be true right away. Like almost like, what was it? Like 6 months down the line, they immediately cut off that that ability. So I was right in that sense. So what I had to do was I had to buy a late 2013 15-inch MacBook Pro. Now, obviously, I didn't have to do this. I could have bought a brand new MacBook. I could have brought an iMac, or I don't know. There was a million other things. I could have tried to, put Mac OS Mojave on this one and still kind of hack my way through it. But I decided that if I'm going to be using this as my main machine, I might as well get something a little bit bigger, a little bit more powerful. And when I say main machine, I mean main portable machine. I'm still Windows on my desktop. I'm not going to be switching that anytime soon. And that's mainly what I code on anyway. I'll do all my coding and stuff here, and then I'll test on my MacBook if I have to. So with that, I bought late 2013 15-inch MacBook Pro Retina. It seemed to tick all the boxes that I needed. It had a quad-core processor. It has a bigger screen, higher resolution screen, that Retina display. It's super nice. Keyboard's great. It has all the expansion that I need with the USB ports. It has 16 gigs of RAM. It has even a dedicated video card. I mean, I don't really need that for coding, but it's a nice to have. So essentially, it really did tick all the boxes that I needed. And I went out and bought it, but I had issues right away. So, and I don't know if this is a quality control thing with Macs, or it's just weird issues with Mac OS, or it's just kind of a degradation of Mac products down the line, because it is old. I mean, 2013 is how long ago now? Like 6 years almost? 5 years? 4 years? 5 years. Okay, let's say 5 years. It's a 5-year-old device. So, I mean, I guess from all the reviews I read, it should still be fine, but apparently there was something wrong. So the issue that I had was a system process called kernel task was taking up over 500% of my CPU processing threads. So it made the Mac unusable. And this would only happen, and again, this is a really weird, and if anyone out there has this issue, like I'm sure a lot of people use MacBooks and maybe have this issue as well, but what would happen was when the computer would charge to 100%, and then continue to be plugged in, it would get this issue, and I barely could use it. Like literally switching an application would be like a minute of time. Nothing would work because, again, some random kernel task, like a kernel task is a system task that I can't actually kill because it's in control of like your heat and your your heat monitoring, your processor monitoring, because control of a bunch of like really important things on your MacBook would just take up all of the processing power of that machine, and it wouldn't let me do anything on it. And there was pretty much nothing I could do at that point. What I realized was disconnecting the battery, letting it drain down a little bit, would make the Mac usable again. And later down the line, I actually did a battery recalibration by draining it to 0% and then charging it to 100%. And that seems to have fixed it, I think. Now, it works fine. I don't get that kernel task issue anymore. But what happens is I think my CPU is still power throttling at certain situations where like it will slow down if I have like Chrome open and Xcode open pretty quickly. It'll slow down, especially if I'm running off battery, it'll slow down. So it's like I don't know what's happening with this thing, and I don't know if there's a problem with it. I know it's not a heat issue. I have checked the thermals. I've been monitoring the thermals. They're completely fine. I've put like a fan monitoring program on there so I can actually customize the fan curves and get them to run faster. That's been working fine. Like the heat, there's no heat issue. It to me sounds like an actual power throttling issue of the CPU. So like the CPU is not getting enough power to be able to boost up to its clocks. Maybe there's a chip dead or something. I don't know. It's working okay right now. Like I say, it's definitely usable. It's not locking up like it used to with the 500% thing, but it still bothers me because it's like, why is there an issue? Like it doesn't make sense to me. So that's one thing that I kind of annoyed me. So at one point when I was like, I don't know what to do with this 500%, like I can't even use this computer, I was like, okay, well maybe I should just flat out go and buy a new MacBook. And that put me into a spot where I was like, okay, let's take a look at how much MacBooks cost, what the problems are with the current generations, like are there any problems? And I went down like a huge rabbit hole. So the new MacBooks are not good. The new MacBook Pros, in all essence of the word, look to be a disaster from many, many different angles. So apparently they have issues with their screens failing randomly. From random use, there's no like actual indication of the use that's causing it to die. We know why it's dying because of a little cable that they're using, but we don't know why it's causing it to die. And there's no like indication of when it's going to happen. So it could happen a year down the line, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. When you're out of warranty, it doesn't matter. So it could happen anytime. And then there's the same kind of issue with the keyboards where your keyboard will get dust stuck underneath it. And then that key will just stop working again. So you have to get it replaced. But then what happens if 3 years down the line, like you want your keyboard just dies randomly because it got dust stuck underneath it, then you can't use your MacBook anymore. And then the third thing is the price. So if these two issues were, on a cheaper notebook that I would expect to, change in 2 years while it's still under warranty, I could maybe get myself around that. Even then it's kind of ridiculous because apparently the failure rates are extremely high on these things. Like according to tech YouTubers and tech sources, they get 5 laptops. 3 of those laptops usually have the issues within like 6 months. That's crazy to me. That's like usually tech YouTubers don't get issues because they get the best stuff if they're getting review units, or B, like if it's a small issue, they're not going to be experiencing it because only a certain subset of the community is going to experience it. Maybe only one of the tech YouTubers, but literally everyone is experiencing it. So obviously it's a huge issue. Apple has admitted that it's an issue. They haven't admitted to the extent of the issue. They've been replacing these things nonstop. So to me, it sounds like the new MacBooks are an absolute disaster. So again, back to the price. To spec out a reasonable MacBook that I could use, over 3 to 5 years, it would be well over 3,000 Canadian dollars. Like well over. Probably more because the 15 inches are more expensive. But that, to pay that for a quote unquote premium product and then expect 3 years down the line to be, let's say you have an amazing product and it lasts 2 years without any issues. And then all of a sudden you get dust stuck underneath the keyboard 3 years down the line when you're out of Apple warranty. You're screwed. Like, I know Apple warranty is great. They'll give you a new notebook, no problem. But like, if you're out of Apple warranty, then you have to get it replaced. And these things are not replaceable. Nothing inside of it is replaceable anymore. You can't replace the RAM. You can't replace the CPUs. You can't replace like really the display replacements are really, really hard because of the T2 chip blocking in any sort of replacements that you would put. Like, it's essentially impossible to repair unless you bring it to an Apple store. And Apple stores do not have reasonable prices if you're out of warranty. So they're locking you into a situation where you have to buy a new MacBook. So the product, like, and I'm like, I was perplexed. I was like, what do I do? Do I buy a newer old MacBook? Like, what's the situation? Like, do I, scrap this MacBooks? Do I buy a newer old MacBook? Do I go to do I just risk it on a newer MacBook for like $3,500 and just, whatever, let's just do this. I didn't know. I still don't really know what to do. I've decided to kind of salvage the one that I have right now. Again, it's kind of working still. So I'm gonna salvage it. I'm gonna wait and see if they come out with fixes for everything. And I'm not gonna be like, first one buying it when they come out with a brand new design for a MacBook Pro. But maybe if like 6 months, a year down the line, people don't have those serious issues. Like, there might be little things here and there, but if not everyone's having an issue, I'll look into buying a newer MacBook, because I don't really have a choice. And this brings me to my next problem with macOS, is the fact that they don't give you choices. Like, I would love to be able to develop for iOS on my Windows device, or even I'll concede to developing on Linux. Like, I don't mind Linux that much. It's fine. Like, I really don't have any problem with Mac OS, to be honest. If I could put Mac OS on my Windows computer and it wasn't like this hacky Hackintosh process, I would do that as well. No problem. I don't mind Mac OS. It's not that bad. It has its ups and downs. It has, it's pretty easy to use. I like some of its features even more than Windows. But in a sense, I can't do that. I can't rely on a Hackintosh. I'm a developer. Like, I have to work. And the second of all, like, I can't Hackintosh a laptop and expect that to be my main device. Like, that would be crazy too. Having to go through all these hoops to be able to make sure that everything works. Like, Xcode has to work all the time for me. Otherwise, I lose time. I lose money. Like, I'm working full-time hours on a MacBook at this point, pretty much. So I'm stuck in this weird zone where I have to just deal with this kind of semi-functioning MacBook Pro, and hope that Mac releases a better product down the line so I can spend an exorbitant amount of money on it, because I know it's going to be ridiculously expensive. Like, it's going to be like, I'm probably going to be spending $5,000 to $6,000 on a laptop that, the performance I could get from a Windows machine, I could probably get for way less than $2,000. Like, maybe $1,500 on a Windows machine could outperform that $6,000 Mac OS laptop, or MacBook laptop. So it really sucks that they don't give you the option to either develop for iOS on a different machine, or be able to put Mac OS on your machine. And if they would give you like good, affordable options to be able to buy their equipment, then I would understand why they wouldn't do that, but they don't. Like, all their options kind of suck right now. Like, they're just bad. Everything, like, there is no solution to my problem. There is absolutely no solution to my problem. Like, I could keep buying used MacBooks all I want, but it's essentially like that's not a very good solution, because they might have more problems. They might have other problems. Like, who knows? Like, apparently all MacBooks of all years always had like serious problems. So you could run into that at any time. And to fix a MacBook is very expensive compared to fixing other computers, because a lot of things are not interchangeable anymore, especially the newer versions. So the newer it gets, the less extensible, the less fixable it becomes. And you're kind of stuck in this weird cycle of buying another MacBook that sucks, and it keeps getting worse and worse. So I know a lot of, like, I've been ranting a lot, and I'm sure that if you're a fan of Mac, you've had issues with Mac as well, and you've had your positives and negatives. You've probably heard a lot of rants on Mac, but like I just want to point out the fact that they're being very, in my opinion, anti-competitive in the sense for, especially in terms of development. They should allow you to develop for their operating system, and their both their operating systems on other devices. Like Android allows you to develop on Windows and Mac OS. Actually, they allow you to develop on any machine you want: Chromebooks, Windows, Mac OS. Like it doesn't matter what you're developing on. I don't think you can do it on your phone, but like that's just the power consumption issue. But it's just it frustrates me because I have no choice. Like it's not like I can just be like go to my contractor and be like, listen, I'm not supporting Mac OS anymore. Like I'm not supporting iOS. That's it. I'm done with it. But we can't do that because iOS still has a very large market share. iOS still has the best tablets on the market. So if you want like, you know, your sales application to work on a tablet, that's iOS. Like there isn't a good solution. And trust me, I've looked everywhere for Android tablets that are good and reliable and cross all the boxes that an iPad crosses, but there aren't. There just isn't any Android tablet that can compete with an iPad at this point. And I don't see it happening in the future either because it's just iPads are just so much more superior, and Google's just not focusing on that segment because I think because the iPad just dominates it anyway. They tried to put a couple of competitors in line, but they just weren't very competitive, like to be fair. And then, okay, so and the last thing I'm going to touch on is their support for their own products. So they have, speaking of PWAs, right? Like we've talked about PWAs recently. I've been going down a rabbit hole with macOS. So we kind of need camera functionality in our current sales application that we have. Camera functionality is supported, like get user media, WebRTC functionality is supported in iOS 12. Fully supported. It works fine. I can create a website, use the camera, no problem. That's a new feature of Apple. They've supported WebRTC. Hooray for everyone. PWAs don't have access to full WebRTC support. They only have access to a very, very small subset, which I don't know who decided on. Like someone's just like, no, they can't do that. They can't support streams. They can only support like screenshot captures. What? Why? Like, what? Why does PWA not support the full functionality of your own browser? Your own browser supports this. Like, you can't take stuff away. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So anyway, they have, and they did. Can't get user media stream, especially stream, to work on a PWA on iOS. So anything like a QR code scanner, which is kind of what we wanted, anything like a photo booth, won't work on a PWA. Next, they have a thing called a web view, or like anything has, like Android has web views, Windows has web views. I'm sure you know what a web view is. If you essentially just like a little container of the website kernel. So or the engine kernel. So
if you click just to make that simpler, if you click a Twitter link and it opens up inside of the app, it opened up in a web view.
Correct. Thank you, Matt. So that's essentially a web view. So web views are separate containers from what the PWA container is, right? And Cordova, the application packager for iOS and Android that we use, uses a web view instead of this PWA container, which is a separate container. I can't remember what it's called now, but it has its own name. It doesnnt support WebRTC at all on a PWA. On Android, it supports it perfectly fine. And by the way, PWAs on Android support WebRTC 100%. No problem. Like, they are perfectly fine. On iOS, doesn't support it. Not only does it not support it, there is no roadmap. Like, Android has roadmaps. All the other web development industries have roadmaps. They're like, we're working on this. Apple does not have roadmaps for pretty much anything. None of their products, none of their development stuff has a roadmap. You can't go there and be like, well, they don't support camera right now, but like they're saying that they are working on support in the future. They don't have that. They will never say that to you. They will never commit to anything and tell you that they're going to support it in the future. So we can't rely on it. So now we're in a situation, and this is kind of contradictory to what I was saying before with the feasibility assessment, But we're in a situation where we're like, well, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to circumvent the whole camera issue? Like, do we really need camera support in our application? It's not like a super necessity, but it's a really nice to have. And I was talking about how you want your applications to be extensible in the future. Well, this really hinders that. Like, if we were working on Android, no problem. And then again, Mac OS has to come, iOS has to come and be like, no, everything's different. We can't support this. We're not even going to give you a reason why we can't support this. And if you ask us, we're going to delay it even more probably. Like that's what it seems like. I don't think I'm going to have any Apple employees listening to us right now, but if you are, please reach out and tell us different. Like, I would love to hear your side of the story on this, like why you don't support WebRTC, why you don't support roadmaps, like telling us if you're going to support it, why everything that I've just said, just why are you the way you are? That's kind of essentially what I'm saying. So on that note, I think I've rambled on for long enough. I'm sure that a lot of you are either agreeing with me or disagreeing with me or whatever you're doing. Let us know. Like, let us know what I should do. That's the first thing. And I'll pass this off to Matt with the same questions. So, and the audience, let us know what I should do with the situation. And second of all, do you have hope that things will change in terms of MacBooks, in terms of PWAs? Like, should I put my hope in Apple? I'm not a fanboy of Apple. I'm not against Apple in any way, really. People that are more inclined, more interested in the company, do you have hope? Now, I think I know Matt's answer, but I'll pass it off to him anyway.
I have a really weird answer.
Okay.
Not about the hope thing, but I don't use Apple products that often, to be blatantly honest. I don't own a MacBook. Like the company owns a MacBook. Well, like the one that Mike was just describing, to be clear. And well, okay, I'll address the first thing that was fresh in my brain is the issues you're having specifically with this MacBook. So the issues with this MacBook, I'm wondering whether this is why it was sold as used. That would be my first alarm. Now, I think you said you talked to the individual and they said they didn't see the issue, and it is like a really specific, strange issue that like could have been there and they didn't notice maybe or something. Or it could have been from like the wipe, like maybe the reinstallation screwed it up. You know what I mean? Like, it's a really specific issue. So God knows whether they were running an old OS and then you reinstalled and then updated all the way. You know what I mean? And then that's what did it. So it, like, you know, I'm not blaming them or whatever, but it could have been like, that could be the thing, but who knows? Like, it's a used product, you know, that goes without saying. So there's that. I'd also say that I do see problems with MacBooks. So my one friend, years ago, I think it was probably maybe 2 years ago, maybe 1 year ago now, he had a problem where his MacBook stopped reading his hard drive. He thought the hard drive had failed, and we found out it was the cable. And how we found out was, obviously, we replaced the hard drive. It didn't work. And then we were like, okay, what's going on here? We looked it up, and apparently those cables go all the time. We purchased a replacement, and then just I want to say last week, but I think it was last month, I had to replace it again. Same cable. And so it's clearly like a problem, like, and it's like, I would say it's at the engineering level if it's breaking that much. Like, it's a hard drive cable that with also like an IR sensor on it as well. Like, it's a dual like function cable, but basically it's like, I think it's because there's too many right angles in it. Like, you have to bend it with a bender before you put it in the computer, and you have to bend it like maybe 4 or 5 times in 90-degree angles.
Jeez. Because
it goes from the side, so it plugs into the hard drive. The cable then goes under the hard drive. There's a split in it where it goes to the IR, and then it goes up to a wall inside, and it goes, so 90-degree there, goes up 90-degree into a shelf with 2 screws to secure the cable. Then it goes back up again, so that's another 90-degree, and then it goes 90 degrees again to go along the board. So wow. It's like, I think that might be the thing, because I think it's getting pinched because it's like an aluminum back. So when you're bouncing around, because it's a MacBook, I think it's getting pinched. But like, what I mean is like, the reason why I bring this up, because I know that's another MacBook. The reason why I bring this up is like, for this price, yes, we're human. Yes, there's engineering problems, but for a hard drive cable to be failing this frequently is a little bit ridiculous. Mm-hmm. for sure. You're mentioning keyboard problems. I haven't experienced them myself. Definitely heard about them. That's really bad. I remember my other buddy, he bought a new MacBook last year around there, maybe 2 years ago, 1 year ago, something like that. He was saying he didn't have enough space. I was like, oh, just buy a new hard drive or whatever. And he was like, oh, I can't. Everything's soldered on. Can't buy new hard drive. So I was like, all right, I guess that's it. Buy a new $3,600 MacBook then. Now again, I haven't confirmed if that's true, whether he can.
That's true.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, but I haven't confirmed whether I can open that one or not, because this other one I was mentioning with the broken cable was an older one. So I mean, yeah, there's problems, and I would say yes, there's glaring problems sometimes. I would say that Apple will oftentimes try to innovate too much. If that sounds like, I mean, that sounds stupid, but I would say they try to innovate too much in that they try to do things like, oh, we're gonna go super thin with this keyboard, you know, because we want the computer to be even thinner. And it's like, dude, like, it's a MacBook, like, it's pretty thin. It's like, no, I want it to be thinner. And then they're introducing problems for little to no benefit, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not one to talk about maybe thin-in lights. I mean, I do have a Samsung Windows 10 tablet, which is super nice. If I need to expand the storage of that, I don't know if that's possible. Like, to be totally, you know, clear, replacing the RAM of that thing, as far as I know, is not possible. You know, it's certainly not, you know, undo a screw and pull the back off. You know, it's certainly an all-in-one. I'd have to go to a Samsung specialist or look up a guide or something.
But that was $800, to be fair.
Yes, it was $800, and I knew what I was getting
Canadian.
into. This is a tablet that I'm literally throwing into a bag, and I'm like using it as like a little, almost like like an advanced word processing device. And it's not a $3,600 device, and I knew exactly what I was getting into. And a tablet bounces around more than a MacBook usually anyway, so it needs to be all glued together generally. Generally speaking, like I said. But now this is my weird part. I don't use Mac products. I don't personally like the OS. I don't like I just don't like the software all that much. I do like the software on iPads, to be clear. I don't like the software on the Mac OS. If I was Apple, I think they're doing the right move. I know that sounds really stupid, but how convenient would it be if you were running a business where everyone was using your product, your add-ons, your software, your hardware, your apps, all the commission comes to you. Third-party things, if somebody buys a subscription or buys something in your from an app that was downloaded from your store, you get a commission on it. And I think there's some exceptions in there, but generally speaking, you're getting commissions from app sales. You're getting commissions from like all that type of stuff. You have software yourself, something like Final Cut, those type of things. You have software yourself, so you're bringing people in. And the best part about it all is, like, now, you know, MacBooks are, let's just say they're not user repairable. You know, maybe you can do it. You know, you and I do have knowledge of computers. But I'm telling you right now, if I had a MacBook and it broke, I'd go to the Genius Bar and just give them my firstborn. That's basically the
new MacBooks we wouldn't be able to do. We need like surface soldering machines and stuff like that. Like, we can't touch the new MacBook.
And I think that's a good decision for them. And that opinion is not from a consumer. Like, I am a consumer and I hate that, but I also really understand it as an entrepreneur, is what I'm trying to get at. Is I understand that, like, if we could make, or not even we, like, if everyone here, anyone listening to this show that makes websites, if you can make websites where no one could ever go in and edit them but you, and you charge a subscription, how useful is that? How would you do that? Probably.
I wouldn't do it, though. I still wouldn't do it.
You're too ethical, I think. I think you're too ethical in the capitalist
It's an ethic thing. But the thing is that I'm not fully against the whole ecosystem thing that you're talking about. I'm not fully against it. If, and this is a big if, and this is my main problem right now, if they had good options. They don't. Like, if they had an option across the scale, or if they had good products at, you know, even the $3,600 range, if they had a good product there, which they don't have a good product at $3,600.
What would you say that isn't good about the newest MacBook? Like, what?
Failure rates.
Specifically that, like the quality
specifically
control?
Failure rates, yes. Specifically, and mostly that's it. The other thing is that I don't agree with their like hardware choices either. I like AMD. I'm a huge fan of AMD, but they don't have the best products right now for graphics users. And I don't agree with the fact that they only offer AMD products in their MacBooks right now for graphics. because Nvidia just has better options, especially in mobile markets.
Definitely, yes.
Like 100%. So when you're paying $5,000 for a product, I want the best option in it. And again, I am an AMD fan. My entire system is AMD. It's a Ryzen with a Vega in it. But I don't like it when they do these exclusivity deals with people, because the users are the ones that get screwed. So they have like the $3,600 MacBook that I'm talking about has an RX 555 in it, which whatever that is, it's worse, like significantly worse than a 1060 performance. And we're talking computer talk right now. So
we're talking about components. Yeah,
talking about graphics cards in general. It's the performance of like a $200 graphics card, 200 US graphics card. No, a little bit less. Sorry, like a $150 US graphics card in a $5,000 MacBook Pro. Where if they were fine with putting Nvidia in there, they could have the performance of, you know, a $500, $600 graphics card in there and keep that same thinness and stuff like that. That I find that to be terrible as well. So again, two things: failure rate and obviously the price. If they had all three of those, if the failure rate was acceptable, if not every single tech YouTuber in the world was talking about the fact that they're experiencing it, not just it happening, they're actually experiencing these issues, that makes me think that it's extremely widespread. If that wasn't the case, then I wouldn't have as much of an issue with what you're saying, where they would just lock you into their ecosystem and you have to buy their products, but everything worked great together, stuff like that. And from an ethical standpoint and from a business standpoint, I understand where they would be coming from and stuff like that. But considering that they have crap offerings on the market currently for portable computing, it's a bullshit system. That's what I'm saying.
I agree with the failure rates for sure. Like that's one thing. And like when I say I'm like, you're being too ethical, like I mean I'm not. Like you and I aren't exactly like the tyrants of like the oil, like, you know what I mean? Like we're not exactly like oil barons that are being like total tyrants in this space. You know, if there is an oil baron to web development, like equivalent type person, you know, we cut people deals and stuff like that if they have a budget. But, the thing is, I think is what I'm trying to say is that they want to, or at least what it seems to me is that they want to try to keep those prices down and those profits up. And this whole like right to repair movement, I think, is just going to get overshadowed by this type of stuff. Like if I was Apple, and this is serious, if I was Apple and this right to repair movement is going on, I would start engineering my MacBooks such that they could not be repaired. Because if you engineer,
they are doing that,
right? But I mean, like, I think, and I'm not a lawyer, clearly, as we've discussed in this episode, but one of the things is that I would engineer it such that, not that just so that this particular model can't be repaired. I would start engineering systems that could never be, like, couldn't even be changed to a repairable or a replaceable component. Like right now, we could replicate, like we could with components, assuming there was like obviously because every laptop is a custom motherboard. But let's just hypothetically say we had an old school motherboard from an old MacBook that was up to today's speed standards, up to today's technology. We could put in the equivalent amount of RAM. We could put in that CPU, that GPU. We could do that and have it be all modular and open up the back, just like that my buddy's older MacBook and just like the one you bought. We could do that. But
yeah, no, who would do that?
No. What I'm saying is that you could today, like if legislation gets passed for right to repair, you could build that MacBook, like Apple can build that MacBook with modular parts. They just don't. I'm saying they need to engineer it so that it can never be modular, because I wonder whether legislation will force them to go back to the more modular ways. Like, you can have 8 gigs, 16 gigs, 32 gigs of RAM without it being soldered to the board. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, Apple needs to design a special system that needs to be soldered for a certain technological reason, because I would assume that gets them around the legislation. Like, if you have a new piece of technology and they're like, oh, right to repair, and it's like, no, there's like an isotope in there, like, or whatever the nuclear stuff is. There isn't one in a MacBook, to be clear. But like, if you were designing some sort of nuclear product and like they're like, oh, right to repair, and the guys are like, hell no, you need to have a nuclear license to get in there. That type of stuff would get around the legislation. I think, and again, not a lawyer, designing something so that it can never be modular again, can never be repaired again, or can never be like put together like by a user again, is the way they should be engineering their products. Now, I disagree with that as a consumer. I would love for them to have computers that are just like anything else, where I can replace the hard drive, replace the RAM. I would love that. I think that that's the best way to go about it. I do have a custom computer beside me. I have a laptop back there that is, we've replaced the hard drive a couple of times and like done some other work to it and stuff like that. Like I do, because we have the expertise. It saves literally hundreds of dollars. You can just buy a component. Actually, this computer to my right is going to be undergoing some work. Hopefully this week. We bought a better graphics card for it for an insanely cheap price, and I'm going to be taking out the ones that are in there and putting in a new one. And I'm a proponent of that. I want to be clear. Like I don't like people would say like, oh, you're evil, you're just one of those Apple sheep. I'm not an Apple sheep. I don't have a MacBook. I don't care. But I don't disagree.
You're playing devil's advocate, essentially.
I'm playing devil's advocate, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of Apple. If I'm there and they say what decision we need to make, I'd be like, we're going to maximize profits and we're going to minimize costs. That's just the way it is. Now the quality concerns is bad. That's fucking bad. Especially for those prices.
Embarrassing is the right word for it for them. Like I would be very embarrassed if I was Apple right now.
Right. I would agree. I'd agree with you there. Like, it's not good that your keyboards don't work. Like, of all the things, like, I mean, I've had a broken keyboard in my my laptop history, but it wasn't that bad. And stuff like that. I've definitely had issues like that. And we've all had issues with like RAM and all that type of stuff. But the issue here is that like I've had an issue with this computer to my right here has had a graphics card fail. It's had an SSD fail. It's had a fan fail. It's had resonating issues. It's had or several case fans fail. It's had a RAM stick fail. Like it's had a lot. There's a lot of this thing had a lot of problems with it. And it's 7 years old now or 8 years old, something like that. But it's had a lot of problems with it. The repair cost was $100 maybe. I bought some new case fans because those aren't warranted, obviously, and the rest of the stuff was I just shipped it in for repair or replacement and got a new one with a lifetime warranty, and I put it in myself. But if I had to pay a tech, it'd be $100, $110 an hour, or whatever the standard is now. But the thing is with Apple owning that part, from what I've seen, and I've seen very little, but from what I've seen, the Genius Bar or an Apple authorized reseller are very expensive. I think the Genius Bar might be the most expensive in most cases. Extremely expensive. And they do things like, isn't there something like Touch ID won't work or something like that if you don't get an Apple certified part or something like that? It's
not only Touch ID anymore. That's what I was going to butt in and say is like you're saying that they should develop a technology that makes it unrepairable. They have. They developed a chip called a T2 chip that detects all major components of your laptop and gives them specific IDs. And this is a soldered on chip that you can't buy anywhere. So, and you can't program, they have it programmed proprietarily. So if you replace a part, it will just shut down that laptop. It won't work.
Pretty smart. Like that's my first response.
Yeah.
Pretty smart.
And their reasoning for that, like you said, with the whole isotope thing is that that T2 chip is in charge of all security for the device in sense of like people trying to hack into your BIOS and stuff like that. That's what it's in charge of. So that's their excuse for the right to repair. So they're way ahead of you on this on this movement, this right to repair movement. They're not part of it, in my opinion. Like no one's going to be forcing Apple to do this. And unfortunately,
and the thing is like this is the type of stuff too that Apple's really big, and a lot of people will say Apple's too big to fail. But people like us is a good example. Like you're asking what to do. Like what do I do?
Yeah.
What do I do? And the thing is like we don't have $3,600 to spend every couple of years, and if you have to go, you can't be programming for a Mac on a Windows machine. You can do the code, but you can't be compiling for that Mac and for the iOS device. And so, and if you go online to Instagram, like, we're obviously big in the Instagram now, the big boys at 1,000 followers, but like, if you go onto there, you'll see developers left, right, and center that have MacBooks. I don't even know anyone that has I can't even think of anyone off the top of my head that has a PC. I saw one post about a PC where the guy was selling it because he wanted to buy a MacBook. And we went to a startup event in Hamilton, and everyone had a MacBook except for one guy had a Windows machine and one guy had a Linux machine, of all things. A Linux machine, like heaven forbid. And I was shocked to see that thing, to be honest.
I wasn't too shocked to see that, but I was shocked to see the Windows machine. Just because of what I was saying. Like, if you're a serious developer and you're taking any project on, like if you're like an entrepreneur, then why are you limiting yourself by buying a Windows? You're being dumb almost by buying a Windows machine. That's how Apple makes it seem. Because you're limiting yourself in your opportunities. Like if you only have a Windows machine and you only have a certain amount of money, you can't go out and buy a new laptop every 5 seconds. And a developer comes to you and be like, oh, we need you to develop an iOS application, or we need you to, port our site that is in HTML to an iOS device. You can't do that now because you've made this decision to be a Windows person. It sucks because I like Windows a lot. Like, and I'm so used to Windows, but I can no longer, because I chose this profession, and I'm sure there's other professions like that have the situation, I can no longer be a Windows person fully. I have to embrace all the operating systems kind of thing, and it just sucks. And like you're saying, they're not giving me a choice.
The thing is too with this is like the one solution is the first thing I could think of is like, I mean, obviously you're having issues with this used MacBook, but if I needed to be compiling for Mac, I'd be, very stubborn. I'm pretty stubborn when it comes to stuff, as Mike will tell you, but and I'm also basically a Windows fanboy at this point too. To full disclosure, I'd be buying a used MacBook, putting it on the side, and RDPing into it, and using that to compile, and I'd be doing all my stuff on my PC, and I'd be RDPing from my PC to it, and it would cost a lot more money, but it'd be cheaper than buying a full MacBook, and I would still be using my Windows machine, and then occasionally be like, oh, I got to compile for Mac, and I would do it on there, and that's really counterintuitive for mobility, though. Like, I can't be bringing 2 computers with me everywhere.
But what you're saying is an option that is actually an option that we haven't even brought up in this case, and that I could technically do.
Oh, so there you go. Do that.
Yeah, like what you're saying, like have literally a dedicated Mac in your house that's always connected, always on, to the network, and then RDP into it.
Yeah,
that's not a bad option.
Because I've been doing doing that with I have a media server and stuff like that, and I'm slowly spinning it up to manage my entire family's photos and stuff like that, and it's going to be running other applications as well. And that's a Linux machine. But like my thought always is, if I don't want to deal with it at the desk, I'll deal with it in, it's not I almost said the data center sense. Like, obviously I don't have a data center in the house, but like in terms of, I'll deal with it in an infrastructure. I have an in-home infrastructure. I don't want to deal with that at my desk. I'll add it to my infrastructure and just deal with it on a remote basis. And something goes wrong with it, I'll replace it, and that'll be the end of it. But it does suck for mobility. Like, I can't be bringing crap. Like, I can't be bringing this MacBook with me. Or I can't be bringing like say I bought an old Mac tower. I can't be bringing an old Mac tower with me, But you don't need, like, if you have it connected always, you don't need to. The issue that I see can be like availability. Like, if your network goes down, you're kind of screwed. Like, if you're on an extended vacation and there's no one home, you know what I mean? Like, it's a risk that you're doing what you're doing with this. It's kind of like a risk reward situation where you're allowed to bring a Windows laptop that's a lot cheaper, and you can use this old MacBook that is just connected to the network, but you're risking the fact that if you're on an extended vacation, you're using, and you need to get into that Mac, you're going to be screwed. Yes.
There's a potential. And like you said, and I did this, I did this once. I brought 2 devices with me, and it was a disaster. Like, first of all, airport security, having to take out 2 laptops, putting them into 2 separate bins, that extended my airport security, was real big pain. Second of all, just the weight of having 2 laptops in your bag is painful and annoying. And just like having to worry about the 2 laptops always, like when you're traveling, like it's just, it is a huge pain. And that's why I decided to get a more powerful Mac so I could bring that. But I mean, in the future, if Mac keeps screwing up like this, I might potentially just build a good Hackintosh, like little desktop connected to a network and just RDP into it from anywhere I am. Maybe even buy rack space from a server farm so that I can guarantee a network connection or something. I don't know.
You know what's funny is
that's not the worst idea.
There's actually a data center that does that where you can rent Macs.
Yeah,
I saw a video on that on YouTube. Actually, just to interrupt you there.
I wonder how much that would be. I wonder how viable that solution is, because I have thought about doing something like that too.
I'd fucking do that, honestly. Like I said, like I was in the networking field for a bit, and in the not necessarily directly networking. Well, I did do that for a bit too, but a lot of my time in the professional field at BlackBerry was doing like just using servers, and so it did shift my mentality of, oh, I can't run it on here. Do I have an appliance somewhere I can toss it to, because I don't want to do it here. That's always been my mentality, is like, oh, I'll just toss it to the remote stuff. I don't give a fuck. That's a good, like, if we can buy a VM somewhere, like it'd be a VM. It'd be, if you buy a VM somewhere, hell yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Do it. Why not?
Yeah. I mean, like, if you don't have the network connection for it, then you're kind of not having a good experience developing anyway, so you need a network connection for development. I don't know. I think it's a viable option. I think if you think it through enough and you can find a good hosting solution, like if you can find a good VM, Mac VM even, that you pay for monthly, then it might be an option. I just think, like, for me, my thought process was I just want one computer that can do it all, kind of thing, and I want to try this Mac OS ecosystem, and so far I'm not digging it, so maybe I will move on to a more remote system in the future. That's a good call.
Can you explain to me one thing too? Also, is that, can you explain to me the I know we discussed it, but the Xcode situation, because the first thing that came into my mind is that, like, Android devices oftentimes only get 2 years of updates, not in terms of like programming or whatever, but I usually only, like, you'll get 2 or 3 updates, like big like a full system wide update, if you will.
Yeah.
And then yet iPhones do get longer support for sure.
Yeah, something around 5 years for iPhones,
which is big,
and tablets. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, what's the Xcode situation again exactly? Like, is it due to the MacBook? I just can't remember.
So the MacBook is on High Sierra, the old MacBook.
Yeah.
There's the new Mac OS version called Mojave. Mojave. Yeah, that's probably how you say it. Mojave. So it supports a newer version of Xcode, which is their IDE, like their coding application to actually make iOS apps. There's no other coding application to make iOS apps because, again, Apple. Xcode is not the greatest application either. I have my beefs with it as well. I wish that I could just use my VS Code, but whatever. I'm not going to go on that tangent anymore. So essentially what happened was I updated my tablet to the new iOS version, which is 12.2, because all of our clients' tablets are on the newest iOS version almost all the time.
Right.
Like, they update automatically. So I need to be on that version to make sure that the application runs correctly. I went back to my old MacBook just because my new MacBook was having that issue, and I had to quickly do something. I went back to my old MacBook, tried to run the same application that I was developing on that MacBook before, on the new on my tablet with the new 12.2 update. Just told me does not support 12.2. You need to upgrade your Xcode. I go to upgrade my Xcode. It says you need a new operating system. I go to upgrade my operating system. It says it's not supported. So that's it. Done. So the option that I had, there is an option to hack Mojave onto these older MacBooks, but apparently like X, Y, and Z don't work on there. Like, a bunch of different stuff doesn't work when you hack it on. And I was like, I'm not dealing with this. I'll just use the new MacBook. Thankfully, I got it to work to a certain degree. Like, it's working decently now. I need to monitor some processor speeds, which I don't even know how to do in Mac OS. Like, there's no I don't think there's an application that monitors Mac processor speeds. So
go to the Genius Bar and ask them.
Oh, jeez. If I went to the Genius Bar with this problem, they'd be like, well, you got to buy a new MacBook. There's no doubt in my mind that he wouldn't even do any sort of diagnostics. They wouldn't do anything. They would just tell me to buy a new MacBook. But okay. Yeah, so that's essentially the problem with the whole updating thing. But again, like, they supported that 2011 MacBook with High Sierra, and that's what, like, 8 years of support. I'll give them a pass on that. That's fine. You give 8 years of support to your products. Now, Windows 10 technically still works on 8-year-old laptops, but still.
Windows is a different animal because
exactly.
people would stick with their, back in the day anyway, like before Windows 10 started becoming like an iterative OS. It was like if you had Windows XP when you bought the computer, you just kept Windows XP until the computer broke.
Yeah, exactly. So like I'm not downing Apple on their actual operating system. I'm not actually going after them for their update cycles. Their update cycles are actually very good. And that's kind of my problem, that I bought an older MacBook. That's fine, and it served its purpose. Really, it was cheap, and I got like 2 years of work out of it, or a year and a half of work out of it. So I can't really complain. That's fine. It's the other issues that I brought up that really get me going. But I think we gotta wrap it up.
Draining your energy there, Jesus.
I've ranted on for too long, and I'm starting to wind down now.
Yeah, certainly. So. So let us know what you do. I know a lot of you guys out there do use Mac products, and we're clearly newer to them, being Windows fanboys, and I don't know anything about them for the most part. So I'll direct those questions, if I'm the one that received them. I'll direct those solutions, hopefully, if you have them for us, to Mike. If you can send those to us on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Everything has a messaging app now. I was about to say, like, just I have a messaging folder, so send it to me, whatever that is. So check us out on the socials. But anyway, I'm gonna run the old conclusion now. So thanks for listening, and make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on the platform of your choice. You can follow us on the socials via @HTML all the things. That's on Facebook and on Instagram. You can also find us on Twitter, which is @HTML everything. We are on Medium, and we are on GitHub, and we are also on, as previously mentioned, Patreon, which is patreon.com/HTML all the things. Check out the existing tiers. Hopefully we get some more in the future, and give that a go. Feel free to comment or review on the platform that you're listening to this on, and we are signing off.